and James from Kent County Council. They are our presenters for the webinar today.
Thank you very much for that, Catherine. All right
No
then,
problem.
if there's no issues, let's get going. So, good afternoon, and welcome to this session on auditing and what it involves. My name is Megan Henderson, and this is my colleague James Venables. We are both digital support officers working for Kent County Council, as Catherine said, and our primary responsibility within the council is working towards KCC's digital accessibility agenda. We are basically in charge of auditing all systems that are owned and operated by the council. And we will produce reports on these systems on a near weekly basis when we can. So I'll hand over to you, James.
Yeah, thank you. So in today's session, Megan and I will be breaking this down into 3 parts. So I'll be covering the introduction to auditing at KCC part. And then Megan will be covering how we carry out an audit on a system. And then towards the end of the session, we will summarise this and everything we have gone through and provide some useful further resources to take away. Finally, there will be a 15-minute Q&A session towards the end to answer any questions you may have, but obviously feel free to put anything in the chat while this is going on. So to start things off, what is accessibility auditing? Well, accessibility auditing involves testing the website for compatibility with key user journeys, and this is particularly when using assistive technologies. Accessibility auditing involves testing against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is also known as WCAG 2.1, and this can be broken down into 4 sections: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So all existing public web-based systems must be compliant with WCAG 2.1. Now, this not only includes the system interface itself, but also includes additional elements such as documents and videos and other features. However, there are some exceptions to these additional features. For example, documents and PDFs published before September and other media content published before the 23rd of September 2020 are also exempt. Online maps are exempt as long as there's an accessible alternative provided, for example, an address. And then finally, heritage collection items are exempt where they cannot always be made fully accessible. So furthermore to this, GDS, also known as Government Digital Services, they have suggested the following recommendations when improving the accessibility of a system. So step 1 is to decide how to check the accessibility problems on your website or mobile app. Think about the best way to audit that system. Step 2 is to make a plan to fix any of the accessibility issues or problems that you may face and what remedial action should be put in place. Step 3 is to publish a statement which follows your organisation's format as much as possible. And finally, step 4 is to ensure that any new features added are also made accessible. So to begin with this, I will take you through the framework that we use for accessibility testing at KCC. Now, there are 4 main areas for the framework which we will look at. So first one's resources, second one's scope, and the third one is in 2 parts, process and governance, and the 4th part is measuring success. Now, I will talk through the scope of our testing and the resources we have to use. As well as this, I will touch on the process of an audit and how to review and measure the progress and success made at KCC. So before beginning an accessibility audit, it is important to be aware of what resources and tools your organisation has to test your systems. So the first question to ask is, who should be undertaking that testing? Do you try to upskill staff, or So at KCC we were trained on how to audit by the accessibility lead. So Megan and I are both university students, and we are currently on a 12-month placement at KCC, and we are currently monitored by the accessibility lead for the council, who is in a permanent role. So while doing audits are obviously important, we also do try to encourage users to report any issues found in these systems. So this may uncover issues that we may have missed or not considered due to a wide number of reasons. We do try to use a range of different tools and technologies that cover a wide range of accessibility needs. And as we have access to these features, this can obviously influence what types of tests we can achieve. However, Megan will explain more of this later on. So secondly, at KCC, we have over 150 systems that we should need to audit and assess. Now, these are a wide range of systems, including internal and external websites, web-based systems, forms, and obviously mobile apps. So for each of these systems, we need to decide which pages are in the scope for testing. And obviously for any of, say, such as, PDFs and documents on these pages, they need to also be tested and checked as well. Now, while we should aim to test all the systems owned by the organisation, some systems may need to be prioritised. Now, at KCC, we mainly prioritise this based off a risk rating. This is calculated from two scores, the likelihood and the severity. Now, we calculate the likelihood of a system being audited by GDS and the amount of traffic a system receives, whereas the severity is based on the amount of issues in the system and also partly if it's got a compliance statement or not. And both of these scores are rated from 1 to 5. So once we have collated information on the resources and systems that require auditing, there needs to be some sort of process set in place. And now this can be broken down into 4 parts. So when we engage with the system owner, this is when we should decide when the audit is to be scheduled and determine the scope of that audit. So if we have previously audited a system, we often try to include these pages that were previously tested to check whether these issues have been resolved or not. After we have engaged with the system owner and set the scope, we often carry out an audit and produce some detailed documentation. But obviously, again, Megan will explain this later on throughout the demo. And finally, when we feedback our results to the system owner, we can also advise on actions following that audit and help with discussions on what should happen if certain issues cannot be fixed before the next audit. So obviously, understanding this process leads into the governance. And this is where we need to ask questions around who is responsible in your organization for accessibility and around those remedial actions taking place. Now, in our team, we use a dedicated Microsoft Teams site to manage our test plan, and this allows us to assign who will undertake certain audits, and also it allows us to record which systems should be audited next. Now, at KCC, we don't manage the remediation plans for any system audited. This is the responsibility of the individual system owners. And as we are a team of 3, we do also carry out peer reviews on all of the audits that we complete to ensure all of our results and findings are as accurate as possible. And this is also a great chance to make sure we are explaining to the owner what issues have been found. So the final part of our accessibility framework is measuring success. And this can be measured in a range of different ways. So firstly, we reflect this reporting to senior managers. So in our team, we not only have a Power BI dashboard to help our results, but we also create reports and discuss issues in a digital accessibility working group. We can also show success in an accessibility statement, and all of these issues found in the audits should be reported in the statement. And this allows us to use accurate review dates, and this also helps us to show how accessible a system is or not. However, there may be other situations where we are not able to show success as there has been no change. And in some cases, we can apply for a disproportionate burden. However, this should only be used when it is not possible to continue further with making any changes needed. And this is often because of our costs or plans for replacing the system entirely. I would like to note, though, that this should only be used as a last resort, and it should be reviewed often if it does occur. Yeah, over to you, Megan.
Okay then. So now that we've kind of looked into the framework, we can really now look into the how and why we do this testing. So in this, I'll try to cover the types of testing that we do. I'll have a quick demonstration of an example audit that we would primarily carry out, and the documentation that we do afterwards. And then also I will briefly touch on accessibility statements. So auditing is about finding all the issues that can affect a user's experiencing when accessing and using a web system. As James mentioned, when discussing the scope, we should be checking the systems against the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG 2.1. And again, I'm going to touch on this a bit more shortly, but at KCC, we use a hybrid testing approach. And this is really comprised of two different types of testing, manual and automatic. And so for any issues that are found, we then have to make the remedial action plan to ensure that the system can be accessible as possible to the widest possible audience. So let's get into carrying out a test. So as I just said, there are two types of tests that we generally use, manual and the automated. Manual testing is often where we find the majority of the issues. But again, this is the most time-consuming type of testing. This can often involve testing with assistive technologies, or just sometimes even just searching the page for some issues. And I'll kind of touch on that when I do the demonstration. As you can see on the slide, we actually try and use a wide variety of tests. So anything from a keyboard navigation, magnifier, run a few scripts, that kind of thing. And we can see really how this affects the page. But then there's also automated testing, which is in itself much quicker than a manual test, but really it only identifies around 20 to 30% of the issues on a page. We like to try and use some free software, some Chrome extensions like Axe DevTools and Microsoft Insight to try and find these issues. But using both these types of tests is the hybrid approach that we use. So while this may take longer because we are using both types, it ensures we find the greatest number of issues that we can. However, you know, as always with this type of thing, while testing will not ensure that 100% of the accessibility needs are covered, that is, well, nearly impossible, it does allow that we test for the majority of the main user groups, and we test for those kind of issues that they may find. So let's now actually look at just auditing and having a quick demonstration. So here is just a test website that we have, and maybe you could put in the chat if you can notice, even from the offset, if you do actually have any experience of just looking at accessibility issues, what kind of issues you might find just doing some manual tests. So, you know, if I can look at this and I can already see some things that I would not be able to find if I did an automatic test. So things such as links not being a different color from the main text. Sometimes such as things as having links that just say click here. Seeing that, you know, just by doing a quick test that this is an image of text, again, a different failure. And seeing if it's an image of text, we can look onto different tests, whether it has got alt text, or look into whether the alt text is descriptive. As you can see, even just doing a quick kind of look through, read through, I'm already finding a load of different issues without even having to apply any of my different tests or anything like that. But then when we start to do tests, so let's start with keyboard navigation. Now, this is kind of one of the simpler tests in terms of tools, because we're just tabbing through the page. So just by testing this, I'm looking for things like, does it have a skip to main content button? It does. Have we got nice clear visual indicators like this, which we do? And that's what we're kind of looking for in these kind of tests. Again, the manual testing, while it takes longer, and we would try to do this to a lot of pages, you can spot a lot of things that maybe are out of place, or, where things don't have good indicators. Like, I'm currently on the terms of conditions button, but could anybody in the chat tell me whether that you think that that would be acceptable? Because personally, I wouldn't be able to tell. We'd also, in this type of thing, use different screen readers. Now, I personally won't use a screen reader in my demonstration. If you've been to one of our previous ones, our first session of this Summer of Accessibility with Catherine, she had a great presentation with a screen reader. But again, reading through, can I hear something like that? How does a screen reader interact with the page? We use also a couple of different tests. So we use a couple of scripts. So a text spacing script, these things that you can find online, use through there. How does this interact with the page? On this page, it works rather well, but you've got different examples of where perhaps it doesn't interact correctly, things go off the page, that kind of thing. We also try and remove the CSS of a page. So again, removing that. Does it look good? Does it even work? My script doesn't particularly work on this page. Can we see any workarounds on that? I'm on a bigger screen, so this won't be as effective, but we also magnify the page to 400%. Now, I try and do this on a smaller screen to see if it would reflow correctly. I'm on my big monitor, so it doesn't always, and that's something you can also note of, does things interact differently? Does it change? But you might be able to see at the bottom, horizontal scrolling. So again, that kind of thing, I'm sure you can probably tell, you might put in the chat if you can rise. This is a really easy way to see and spot if a page is actually reflowing correctly, that kind of thing. So very quickly, those are just some of the simple tests we can use with either, assistive software that we may have, or just simple things like keyboards. But say you wanted to have a quick test, or some of the things may be more coding related. So that's where we try and use some of the Chrome extensions we have. So we use two, Insights and Axe DevTools. So if I go to Axe, as you can see, I've brought it up here at the bottom. I have the option to scan the page. Now, we've said briefly how it's a lot of things, maybe 20% of issues you would find. The one other thing I would probably note with this type of thing is that you'll a lot of times get false positives, or it might find things that are not actually there. So sometimes, yes, while it's great, you can find lots of keyboard, you can find a lot of, coding issues, that kind of thing. You still sometimes need to manually use. So sometimes it's not actually as quick as we'd want it to be in a lot of ways. So see here, I've got things like, maybe if you put it in the chat, you might have seen that heading is not meeting the color contrast that we need. So again, it's brought it up. And again, Axe is really good for telling you, what the foreground color is and the contrast. So if you are aware of RCAG, the standard is 4.5:1. You might not be able to see because it's quite small on my screen, but this is only 1.69. And again, it's great for other things. So things like alternative text and images, while this is great for seeing if it doesn't have, it's another drawback of this type of thing that if it does have but ineffective, you sometimes have to look in the code, or sometimes I just use to select an element, and I'll scroll down and it often will say to me what the alt text is. So that apparently says red parrot sitting on a tree branch, which is not quite what it says on the screen, but it's a good example of that kind of thing. And again, really quickly, we can just see a lot of different issues, a lot of different things much quicker with this type of testing. But again, it's not bulletproof. It's not going to find everything. And that's why we like to do just a range of testing. And having these range of options really means that, whether you're a system owner or whether you are just someone wanting to test a system, you can really simply, really easy, just check for small things, even when you're designing pages. So things like links, you can look into things like that and see, if it's accessible or not, even if you don't have lots of accessibility knowledge. So yeah, just on this page alone, we found things of color contrast, we found alt text issues. Keyboards worked well, but the magnify we've seen hasn't worked at all. And that was, quite quick, and I appreciate it's quite quick. So if you have any questions, please let us know. But that was a nice quick way of just showing what kind of tools we have, what kind of things we have, and how we can use them to find these issues, just using, again, quite simple, quite often free pieces of tech that we have to find it. But now that we've kind of very quickly looked at carrying out an audit, we now need to think about, well, a bit afterwards, the documentation side. So once you've looked at and you've found these issues and you've looked at WCAG and that kind of thing, we complete documentation to report this back to the system owners. So there's two types of documentation that we produce. The first one, as you can see on screen, is a fault log. This is where we try to write in the highest level of detail, so that the system owners, the developers, can easily understand, where these issues are. So we like to put down, the URLs, the pages. If it covers multiple pages, we'll try and say there what the issue is, what we recommend. If we also try to include, screenshots, comments, anything that can help them really dig into and work out where a problem is and how to solve it. Oh, sorry, skip forward a bit too many there. Apologies there. But as well as this report, this fault log, which is where often we have the most amount of detail, and generally, we aim it towards the developers or the people who will fix the system, we also like to produce the management style report. Basically, this is a condensed version of all the information we want to compile together. So all of the WCAG failures, we'll put that in there. And that's also where we will put now the number of partially mets, the number of not mets, and also the final system rating. So like James had mentioned before, this is the score. Not only do we work out the risk of the system in KCC's eyes, but also how long we should wait before a re-audit. So say it's a high system, we'll generally try to say after 3 months, unless there's a remedial action in place. Or if perhaps it's a low system, it hasn't got many issues, we'll tend to aim towards 12 months or longer to try and reassess the system and see if it still needs looking at again. But something that you may have noticed or may not, depending on, because I was working through it quite quickly in the demonstration, but another thing that we look at in these audits is the accessibility statement. And we look at that in every single audit we undertake, even if it's a re-audit. So there are certain things that we need to include in these statements, and these things that we look for when we're doing them. So first, we're looking for things like up-to-date contact information. We're looking to make sure that the WCAG failures are mentioned on the website. Are there some old ones on there? Are there some new things on there? And we also see if there's in-date completion deadlines. So for every WCAG failure, we advise that you also have an in-date deadline of when you're going to fix it. This means that we do advise that statements are reviewed annually, even if we don't carry out an audit within a year. So say we've had a low system, we would want them to review the statement, even if we haven't reviewed the statement, just to make sure that those deadlines that we put down, that they had agreed upon, that they are still in date, that they're still valid. Because at the end of the day, statements are really helpful for a user because they allow them to just see whether system owners are aware of a current issue, because sometimes, there is only one of us. They might spot something that we haven't, and they would want to report it to the system owner. And they can also see whether we are aware and whether we're fixing an issue. So and not only is there information on where to report issues, but also where to report complaints, requesting alter formats, or just finding information on third-party content. So after we complete an audit, we will offer system owners the option to run through how to create a statement if there isn't one present. And we have a template which at KCC we use. So as you can see, we have a small screenshot of it there. And we try to make it as simplistic as possible. So, there's only certain sections in yellow highlight that they have to remove, just to make it as easy as possible. And we'd say that use the fault log, use what we've written. But if, say, they have got a statement present, we just often just advise them, okay, you might have a couple of things to fix, or you just need to update the WCAG failings if you fix some things on the website. Just that kind of thing. So let's now, because I appreciate it's now getting towards past, let's kind of round up all that James and I have discussed today and just some main points we hope you can take away from this, because I do appreciate there was a lot of content covered in this half hour. And I hope we can take away some of the key things from this. So first off, we hope you can understand that we try to build in accessibility into all stages of development, even if now it's future updates. This can not only make thinking about accessibility common practice throughout your organization, but it can also just decrease the amount of issues a potential audit may reveal. So say things like click here. If you notice small things like that and you can fix them or just address them easily, that's just one less thing on an audit you might find later down the line. And kind of linking to that, we should be trying to encourage users of systems and system owners to help with these accessibility issues, like James mentioned earlier. As you can see from my demonstration, while we do peer review our findings, we only have a certain time frame. One person may miss something. The more users and system owners understand what an accessibility issue is, even if it's, the more smaller ones or the bigger issues, the more likely errors can be noticed, and it just can help improve the accessibility of a system. So now the regulations are in place and GDS are monitoring compliance, we should all understand that accessibility is not a short-term issue. Public sector organisations need to be investing in either upskilling staff you already have, or getting auditors in to just improve and help monitor an organisation's compliance with the accessibility regulations. And finally, while WCAG is incredibly important and systems should aim for compliance in this, becoming compliant will not mean perfect accessibility. There are so many different accessibility needs out there that it would be nearly impossible to create a system that can work for all needs. But it shouldn't deter us either from just working towards WCAG compliance.
So that was all that Megan and I wanted to cover today. So we have provided some further resources on the screen right now. If anyone needs access to these, I'm happy to post them in the chat. We do appreciate there was a lot of content covered in today's session. So if you do have any questions, obviously, please feel free to put them in the chat and we are happy to answer them now. But otherwise, thank you for attending and we hope you enjoyed today's session.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much, James and Megan. That was really, really helpful. We have got a few questions in the chat, which I'll come on to. But just wanted to thank you really for highlighting things to me again that I should remember. So Jane is always telling me that the automated checkers don't cover everything. And I think you made that very clear. Like I couldn't believe it's only they're only picking up on 20 to 30%. So that's why the manual checking is so worthwhile. And I think the other thing that really hit home is that this is sort of an ongoing thing. It's not a one-off. So that's why I sort of asked the question how often you're doing these audits, and we need to be doing them fairly regularly and making sure we're updating our accessibility statements and things like that, because it's changing all the time, isn't it? So
yeah, it's precisely, things, automated checkers are really useful things and can really help developers. But even if you are, just designing a web page, there are certain things you can even consider from that point of view. Things like links, just maybe even the styling of a page, what colors you use, whether you use underline, italic. Those things they're very simple things. They're things that, you think about when you're designing a page, and you don't have to be a developer to fix all the major issues. There are some things that, you can tackle. Make sure you have descriptive alt text on your images, that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I just wondered, do you get much, I'm thinking about, when you explained how you fed back your findings and sort of give recommendations for change. Do you get much pushback from suppliers who say they can't do that yet, or do you find many barriers with that?
We do sometimes have to re-explain ourselves and just state that, it's the law, it's the regulations. We're not trying to be awkward. We're trying to make something as friendly for everyone to use as possible.
Yeah.
But most of the time people are quite understandable and they realize that, it's quite a big deal. And especially it's more, the more problems we have is more people in the past that, it was never a requirement years ago, and it's only really a recent thing. So
Yeah.
it's more nowadays it's become more of a push, and developers and other people are already aware of it before it even happens. But sometimes, yeah, we do have to just explain and offer as much support as we can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and kind of linking onto James's bit there is sometimes, if we can't make, developers turn around and say, well, we can't make something accessible. Sometimes that has kind of inspired people to go, okay, how can we redesign a page differently? How can we look at this differently? And they found they liked something completely different to what they had before, and they like it even more. So sometimes, saying, actually, no, that's not accessible, has kind of made them think a bit differently how they display a page, and they found something they like more. So, it can help sometimes even with design without realizing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, thank you. I'm having a look at the list of questions. I think most of them we answered on the way. James mentioned something about using Lighthouse built into Google Chrome, and there was someone else, Insights, being used as well. They're all things you use.
Insights, we don't have so much with Lighthouse, but we do use Insights at ours. That one's really good. Sometimes, it's nice to know that where Axe and Light Insights are finding the same issues. That can really make sure some things are found. Insights can be better. Sometimes it has nice big nice icons that say this is where an issue is. Axe, sometimes you have to look a bit further. But Insights is brilliant, I find, and probably James will agree with me, especially for focus order and things with keyboard, because it makes it lovely and clear to when we're trying to explain to a user, look, this is where the focus order is going. It can go from across here and then down there. It's really cool, especially for that type of thing. So yeah, definitely
And it gives you
advise.
little,
Yeah,
yeah,
it gives
it
a
gives you
nice
little
focused order.
numbers and then
Yeah,
dotted lines, and it shows, and we can screenshot that and put it in
yeah,
the audit fault log. And in that
yeah.
way, the system owner straight away, they can open it up and see, the focus order.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, and that's really helpful. Even, sometimes even when we're in meetings afterwards, because something that we didn't really touch on, after we've had these, we sent the report, sometimes we do have to come into meetings and talk about it further, and it's just, a nice way to do that.
Yeah. We've had a question as well from Anne-Marie, I think, who said, are there any automated checkers that work well with web pages that have iframes? Most that I've tried have struggled.
Iframes is
Mm.
a bit more of a touchy one. I don't think the ones we use are particularly perfect at that. But again, automated testing, it's
When it comes to
yeah,
stuff like that, that's when manual checks and
yeah,
doing it yourself is much better, because you cannot rely on an automated checker.
yeah,
It might be perfect, but the checker might be saying it's not accessible, or it's picking up this issue, and
Yeah.
that's why you can't always. That's why you can't rely on automated tools only. So when it comes to iframes, yeah, I always do that manually.
Yeah, I think James has mentioned Lighthouse picks up the lack of descriptive text on iframes, so that might be helpful.
Mm.
Someone else has asked, so Neil has said, all of our departments contribute and approve their own content. We currently have over 50 editors and approvers. How do you skill up such a large user base in accessibility without breaking the bank and keeping them on the case?
yeah.
So
Mm.
I don't know, Neil, if are you thinking that all of those people would be doing audits, or you just want all of those people to be knowledgeable about accessibility and what they're producing?
Well, I can definitely say, especially from a content side, so especially if we're creating, PDFs, Word documents, we're at KCC, we create a lot, we upload a lot of documents. We do try and make sure our staff is upskilled in that. We run workshops, our team has been really on the go. We have a digital services team who's also really on the point of checking things before it's uploaded and that kind of thing. A lot of our departments are responsible for making sure the documents they produce they have to make sure they're accessible. We won't upload them, especially now the regulations are in effect. We won't upload them if they're not accessible. And that's really digital services. They've been really good at supporting us in that.
Yeah.
But again, it's just kind of with the workshops, that kind of thing is where we can help make sure that we're skilling people up without, as Neil said, breaking the bank.
Yeah, definitely. And Neil, it's probably worth mentioning that we do lots of sessions on digital accessibility, so we can do some live sessions with staff to try and get them engaged. And we also have an e-learning package on digital accessibility that might be of interest to you. And I think the last in our series of seminars, we're going to be giving a demo on that. So that might really help, might be something that you're interested in. What have we had? Some more things coming in. Yeah, educate everyone in the basics of accessibility. Yeah, definitely. I think Megan and James, you probably agree with me. It's all about getting it right at source, isn't it? So a lot of the time it's about how to use Word properly and things like that to try and help with accessibility. What are the consequences of failing the WCAG guidelines to the page owner?
So from a KCC point of view, we tell the page owners that yes, what your has produced has failed the guidelines. We can advise, we can try and speak to them as much as we can, but at the end of the day, kind of the biggest consequence of if GDS decides to audit your system for whatever reason, you will be required to definitely fix it then. So the consequences really are, you need to be working on it. There's nothing that we can do necessarily if it's a document. Say if you aren't the page owner for digital service, you might have your document pulled if we don't get it accessible. But yeah, especially from a consequence point of view, especially GDS, if they think you're not compliant, that's where the real consequences come in.
Excellent. Thanks, Megan. I think we've captured everything that's come in on the chat.
I think there was one more. Did we do the one from Anna?
Oh, Anna, yes, sorry, about how do you check third-party software accessibility? Are you requesting an audit from the supplier, or do you audit yourself?
So when we come across third-party content in our audits, say on KCC websites, we tend to avoid it because it's not our content, nor is it that system owner or that developers. It's a third party. So for example, people might have Facebook on their, a little Facebook frame on their website, and there's not much we can do about that. The only thing we do is we mention there's in the accessibility statement that KCC has. We have a third-party content section, and that basically kind of covers us for saying, content that we don't own, develop, or fund ourselves, we are not responsible for. And also, if possible, depending if they have one, we also try and link that third-party content's accessibility statement on there. So, for example, we have the Facebook accessibility statement on our KCC website statement. That makes sense.
And if we yeah, sorry to jump in there, James, but if we're talking about software that we buy, so KCC do buy some systems, we do audit them. We find that it's sometimes not as easy to get things fixed because it's a third party. You know, it's not as easy for us to get a statement up there for some third party systems. We do audit it just so that we can say we know what especially for the users of Kent, what accessibility issues they may find from that kind of set, and you know, still have that risk. I'm not sure if you've got anything else to add there, James, about kind of, you know, the third party systems that we've paid for in the past that we've had to assess.
Yeah, I think covered everything really there.
Yeah, and actually that might be a good point to mention the next webinar that's coming up, because that's about procurement, isn't it? And accessibility. So that may link in nicely about how you build this digital accessibility into all your procurement. So actually
Yeah.
those software systems that you're procuring, try and get that sorted out at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah,
so,
that would be a much better one for that kind of thing. But again, with that kind of thing, you know, if it's near the beginning, it's much easier to get accessibility in, you know, right from the get-go than trying to fight it a few, you know, however long later we've had the subscription, that kind of thing. So yeah, that'd be a great one for you to
yeah, definitely.
Yep, Caroline, I believe it's on Eventbrite, but I'm sure one of us can get you sent a link.
I can put the link in the chat in a second. So if you go to Kent Connect's website and the event page, you will see all the webinars there, and you can sign up to them all. There's what number are we on now? This is 3. So there's 5 webinars left. So I think, oh, there we go. Thanks, James. The link is there. So I think, bearing in mind, looking at the time, we better call it a day there. So I'd just like to thank you again, Megan and James, for a really useful session. And thanks ever so much to everyone who's attended. Hopefully we've answered all your questions, but anything we haven't, we will get back to you on. I hope you found it useful, but please do fill in the feedback form if you get time. The link's at the top of the chat. And we hope that we'll see lots of you perhaps at the next webinar, which is on Tuesday next week. And that is all about procurement and accessibility. So hopefully you can join us then to find out what others are doing to ensure those suppliers are meeting our accessibility standards. So thanks very much, everyone, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.